afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Adobe Live. We're here for our regular schedule of creativity. Today I'm joined by David Cousens. Welcome back to Adobe Live. This is, how many times have you been on the stream, actually?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, just made me think.
It's been a few.
Yeah, so we are joined by your incredible presence again, once again. Thank you for joining us. And welcome to everyone else in the chat. I've just seen my screen is scrolling very fast. Let's move that back. Good morning, good afternoon even to Michelle, Kirsty, Tim, Stefan, Sean, and some other people. Oliver, let us know if you're here in the chat, and if you want to come and join us, then make sure to join us on Behance. That's where we're all chatting, and we'll get some questions thrown over to you. Because this is a special week, we've got 3-part stream series with David Cousens. This is going to be fun, right? We're going to go through all sorts of comic illustration.
Oh yeah, it's going to go all over the place. It's not in a bad way. Yes, train wreck. No. Yeah, I'm covering different kind of things. So each day it won't feel too repetitive, or I won't end up going over the same thing. So like each day's going to be a bit of a different flavor.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've kind of today we're going to go over the early stuff to do with making comics, and which you need to do to avoid certain pitfalls, which I know because I fell down every single one of them. There's also tomorrow with Maddie, I'm going to be doing some more traditional drawing stuff, and then on Wednesday with Tony, because he's obviously the design ninja and knows all of his shortcuts and things. I'm much more taking us down the route of time-saving techniques and like intelligent ways of thinking things to avoid work.
Nice.
Avoid extra work, just avoid work. But yeah, so it's going to be quite a nice 3 days, I think, hopefully.
Yeah. So just to give a bit of context for everyone, so I know you've been on the stream a few times before, but maybe let's go through a bit of an introduction on who you are, what you're currently working on, and maybe where your journey led to do this, because I know you've got a bit of an interesting background on things.
Yeah. Well, it's apologies for those of you who've tuned in before and heard this before. Yeah, I've been illustrating for around 15 years now, which is terrifying. I started off in a more editorial illustration, and kind of dipped into books here and there. Nice. And then gradually over the last 2-3 years, I decided to like chase my love of comics, which was like always the thing I wanted to do but was always too afraid to do. So that's what I do now. And I've worked for the client list kind of gets a bit boring after a while, but it's like Adobe, Apple, BBC, Nickelodeon, quite a few places, which names are escaping me right now.
Yeah. No, it's I mean it's always great to hear of having like a childhood dream, you know, doing the grunt work and then able to realize that dream, you know, once it's possible. In some ways that's potentially a more enjoyable journey because it makes the reward that much sweeter. Whereas if you landed in some comic job immediately, you'd maybe never know how much of a desire it would have been throughout your whole life. And I guess now you kind of look at it and you're like, that's what you've always wanted to do, and here you are doing it. You're doing it.
Yeah, it's been quite interesting actually, because like you said, it's offered me a unique perspective, because for so many years, despite the fact I've always loved comics ever since I was a kid, for my first 10 or so years of illustrating, it was like traditional illustration. And so I came from, it's like you'll be able to see through some of my work later, I've got a slightly different sensibility with my work than say like other comic artists, and so I'm often thinking more about like how the page looks as a thing by itself. So if you were to say the page is a piece of art, and yeah, I think a lot of my approaches, you tend to get a lot of comic artists will specialize. They will just do the penciling. Some of them were penciling, but it would just be entirely black and white. Whereas I kind of do the whole lot. because I'm used to coloring my stuff, and so it's like, so like I'll bring stuff to color. I'll have like different like opinions on how things should look.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has been an interesting journey, like drawing on those kind of things, and it was nice when after like you said, doing so many years of like, some work was very enjoyable, don't get me wrong, but a lot of it I was not enjoying.
Yeah.
And then when I did finally get brave enough to do this, it's very, very enjoyable. And I've worked some absurd hours sometimes with this, and it's not felt, I've not resented it or begrudged it or just thought, oh, I just need this to end. It's just been really genuinely enjoyable.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I'm looking at the screen here, and the viewers can't yet see this. There we go.
There we go.
So what we're looking at here is, well, it's so much for the eyes. Let's run through what we've got. I love it.
There's a lot of stuff. We are looking at currently we've got two projects on the right hand side. We've got some stuff which I'll talk about in a few minutes. On the left hand side, this is 90% finished. It's the colors need some tweaking and some finalizing, but this is an Adobe Live exclusive because this is the first time I've shared this online at all, because I've been working on this recently. This 6-page short story comic, which is going to be part of an anthology for Higher Illo, which it is completely creator owned. It's like I've written it, I've drawn it, I've colored it, I've written so everything here is completely mine, which is I think the first time I've done a comic thing.
Yeah,
and it's been 100%.
So this is an anthology with other artists, or is it your?
Right,
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any crossovers in the stories and the characters?
No, it's entirely just people showcasing their own work. It was just literally, the brief was as simple as it needs to be in color and it needs to have 6 pages, or it could be sort of 3 to 6 pages, I think. But I felt, well, if you're going to go in it, then you may as well have 6.
Yeah. I can see what you mean immediately of saying that you take your whole page as a piece of artwork, because even viewing the zoomed out view of this, we're getting a sense of multiple things rather than it being a 6-page divisible by tiny little frames of something.
Yes. Yeah, precisely.
Especially, what would that be? Page 4 in particular. Yeah, I'm intrigued to see more on that. That's quite a cool one.
So page 4 is this one in the bottom left.
I can't count. Page 5.
Page 5.
I'm counting from 0. There we go.
That's no problem. Yeah. So this is a great example, actually. Traditionally, you would have more of a typical grid structure with comic stuff, and people will advise you from deviating for that against it because of storytelling reasons. But I was fairly confident that my stuff, the panels that were included were actually like pretty clear as what was going on. And as far as here, we've got like a guy looking up at these floating stones. The woman's quite clearly just tired of him, and then he's got his dramatic revelation, and then we go for like a close-up, which like to show how intense it is.
Yeah. And
then he's got his crazy idea that these rocks are all alive, which is why they're floating. And so that still reads, but also we've got this like it's literally kind of spiraling into madness. Of like how it goes. And whereas actually, do you know what I can show you typically, because I just I've just got on Kickstarter right now. There is I've got a comic which is in its last days, and I'm just going to open up. Let me just see. I need to find one. It's a bit of a violent comic, and it's just occurred to me that I don't want to share anything particularly not family friendly.
We can always drop a link.
Yeah, let
people's curiosity.
Yes, I was trying to. I forgot this. Streaming always kills my app's preview. So typically, actually, I can open this one. There we go. If I drag this in, there we go. So this is called Chances Are, which the writer is Matt Garvey. This is the artwork without any of this speech or narration or anything. And Matt prefers he prefers much more traditional grid style storytelling. So I started to go off the reservation a bit with some of my crazier stuff, and then he was like, "Oh, I'm not sure about the negative space," and he wanted to see like more of the artwork filling the page. So that's something that you can do, and it works. It does work very, very nicely. But yeah, I tend to prefer things going a little bit more crazy, and I don't know. I like everything to be a bit arresting visually.
Yeah, and it definitely makes you stop and look, because you realize there's a first piece of artwork, which is everything, and then you look in to see the details. I'm generally just more drawn to that, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's comics are a unique medium, because you don't just have it like a series of illustrations, for example, or like photographs where you've got you literally like one's next to the next. Because you've got like the piece as a whole as well. I'm pointing at my screen because you can't tell I'm doing that. I think my mouse is going to show up particularly well. Like on this left-hand page, which is the first page, we've got the bottom 4 panels. They just lead you down. So you've got your 4 images, but they're angling down towards the page as they go, which gives you this feeling of like the character's descent there. And also you can have fun things like because this is the most important part, she's breaking out the frame.
Yeah.
Which is much more dynamic, and kind of it shows you like this is the main thing that we need to look at. And so she's breaking the comics borders. And that kind of thing I think is particularly fun about comics, and I often wonder why people don't do it more.
Yeah, that's true actually. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have an answer of why. Maybe there are some editors out there who are just, afraid of the page and wanting to fill it all the time.
Do you know what? It's entirely possible, and I also actually I do have a lot of sympathy. A lot of people are on severely strict deadlines, and so they may not have time to play around and say like, I think this would look good if a character's doing this, and then chance it and then send it off to the editor, and the editor's like, nope, standard thing, complete redraw. So I kind of get that. And I mean, as you can see on this one here, I don't mind. Like I did this just for sake of variation. You can have fairly straightforward traditional blocked up panels, and it still looks nice. It still works.
So in terms of choosing your composition, how much flexibility do you have? Like if you were to readjust, the one where you've got the scaling stepping down, is it a complete redraw, or are things, in enough of a flexible format that you could move them around and rescale it?
For this, I'd be in trouble, to be honest. I mean, you're working digitally, so within a certain amount, you can get away with transforming stuff, and it's not going to affect the integrity and whatnot. Like you turn it into a smart object, and life's going to get easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I could take, say, the line work of the character, turn it into a smart object, and move her around, scale it down a bit, maybe kind of tilt her, and everything would still be okay. But yeah, there would be an element where if somebody else will redraw you, oh god, is there any way I can talk you out of that? But no, it's sorry, I've actually just completely lost my thread.
No worries. But yeah, I guess you have some flexibility with like with smart objects and things, but then I can also imagine that further down the line you create almost like a hole for yourself where some things are in flexible formats, other things aren't, and then you, especially if you come to revisit a project, say a few weeks later, you've had some other projects in between, and you might think like, oh, what was I doing here? How does this bit, like if I do that, does that break elsewhere?
Oh yeah. There's a I don't know if you're the same, Joe. It's when I've got certain projects, they become like my main focus, and so much like a computer, my RAM starts to fill with that, and how things look in the visuals and the aesthetics. And then if you have a gap, you come back to it, and it's really troubling. Wait, oh god, what was this? Who were these characters? How are they drawn? Like, and then that's when you start to have to refer back to your notes, and then you look at like visual things, and that's why things like character guides are good, because you can think, okay, what expressions does this character have? Because otherwise, I'm going to draw the same 12 expressions on everybody.
Yeah, I guess. Do you put together like almost like a style guide or like a character guide type of thing?
Yeah, actually, it's that was going to be one of the things I was going to talk about. Actually, it's I recommend for everybody, if and I know this because I didn't do this when I first tried to make comics a few years back. You need, but if you're going to draw the same character repeatedly, you need to have, as a minimum, need something like this, like a character guide.
Okay.
Ooh, okay, that's a bit too big. Bring it down. And also for the main characters, if you know they're going to turn up, it's a bit bigger. Expressions.
I see.
So it's
that was an unintentional segue. I just.
I know. No, it was fine. It was good. Yeah. It shows it's working.
I mean, it's kind of it's similar to how, you know, my background being in design and more like, you know, interface based things at times. It's the same as putting together like typographic styles, and you know, how do things look when you've got a title, a subheading, and a body? How do things look when you just have the title and the body, and you kind of piece it all together? So that's where my mind was going on questioning that. So it's actually really interesting to see.
I'm assuming you often use style guides and.
Yeah, a lot of the time it's a bit of a back and forth, because I like to start with creating some sort of guideline. I love working within guidelines, and I'm very sort of like rigid at times. I find working within guidelines enables my creativity, but then as things change and you sort of like break it apart, and you know, you find a different flow with it, then it comes retrospective at the end, where you then create a style guide for everything you've just done, so that when you hand it off to someone else to continue the design, then that is the accurate sort of Bible of design, I guess.
That's very good thinking. That's very good thinking. Yeah, it's no, I learned this the hard way. I tried to. You know what? I'm going to try to see if I can open up some of my earlier stuff. This is actually based off an old thing I did. Hang on, let's open up the original version. I'm hoping this isn't too huge and will break the stream. This 6-pager is a spin-off, effectively. A good many years ago, when I first, this may not load, I'm not sure. Hang on, let's cancel that, because that feels like it's taking too long. I'm a bit worried about the file size of that one. Let's just go there and see if I can just bring in a preview instead.
Out of interest, what sort of resolution are these made at?
This one that's just popped up, the reason it was too long, that was probably far too big. I think I made that at like A3, so that's two A3 pages at about 600 DPI, which is why it broke. Which is why the stream didn't like it, which is far too much. And because when traditionally I would always work at 300 DPI for things, which is why A3 is a natural fit for illustration. Maybe it's like 420 if somebody asked for it. But with comics, when I first came to it, I didn't know any better, and so people started to say it needs to be 600 DPI. I thought, that's huge, that's absolutely enormous. What I didn't realize is that that's because when comics get reduced down, much like traditional hand-drawn comics are drawn on 11 by 17 inches pieces of paper, it gets shrunk down. You just need to, you can do it on a much smaller page. So the pages here would be, it would be like standard American size. That would be image size. Yeah, so it's not quite A3 as far as
it's like US. That's about a US letter, I think.
Yeah, it's just about 7 by 11 inches.
Yeah.
At 600 DPI, which will print really, really nice, and that's done because the line work's so important, so it needs to be crisp. Um, yeah, like I said, with the other one I made, it was one of the things I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so,
No, it's
yeah,
a vital piece of information because it really is the foundation to everything that you go and do afterwards.
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And it was, I'm trying to find one with text on that I did, but I'm not seeing it on there. But yeah, basically, it's this one here. We get a little bit of the story time. This was a story called Falling, which I started years and years ago, and it was about this girl here who literally, the story starts, she's falling through the sky, suddenly wakes up, and depending on how fast the preview will load, go on, do it quickly. Yeah, there we go. It's a big, massive explosion, which then draws the attention of other people and then kind of kicks off the story. However, this, I had not plotted any of this or planned it or done stuff. And so part of the mistakes I made was one, well, I hadn't plotted it at all. I thought it'd be fine to just keep telling the story and hope that it fell into place, which was optimistic. Two, it was a massive epic, and I think everybody falls into this. This is regular stream viewers will have heard me mention the world building trap before, and it's where you love the idea so much you come up with civilizations. There are societies, there are religions, there are gods, there are histories, and you go crazy on it, and it's great fun. And then suddenly you think, oh my good lord, I can't tell all of this.
Yeah,
and so yeah, this was too enormous. And I was designing characters on the page, which was a massive mistake. And I thoroughly advise against, because say, let's see if I can get. Oh,
I'm just imagining similar to when you're a child and you're writing a story, and then you get to the end of your book, and you've only got half a page left, and you just end up and it was all a dream.
yeah. And they all got what they wanted at the end. Yeah, it was like with this page here that's showing now, we're 2 pages. I was writing the story, and I thought we need to go to a second plot, and these characters weren't supposed to turn up for ages into the story, and so I just started to draw them, and I hadn't decided how they were going to look. And so I started to change how they were looking on the page. And then this went through several iterations. I was like, oh, no, I don't like that. That makes a weird shape. That's got to move. This isn't reading from far away. And it was absurd. So I think this is roughly where I stopped. Actually, I can show you kind of where I stopped, because it's literally halfway. You can see me just give up. It's proof that planning ahead needs to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really was a case of I was just kind of running off. And one of the things which suffers as well is the storytelling. When you are plotting something, you've got a much better feel for say the pacing. If I lower these ones for a second. So say with if I get back in place, this might take a little. This section here, these first 2 pages, you have the characters falling out of the sky, almost crushes this racing tortoise, and then last minute one of the rocks catches on a parachute, and so she lands and it's all fine. And then you see a mysterious figure who turns out to be this guy who is a rock salesman, because they're floating stones, and and he's trying to sell these rubbish demagicked rocks, and so he's just a complete chancer trying to sell stuff. And originally the story was just, it focused on him trying to tell various stories to get her interested in buying a rock, and then her just wanting to study because she's a scientist. But like pacing wise, I was kind of like, oh well, that's like, I mean, you've got your basic plot in pages like 4 to 6, but it wasn't, the original version wasn't that interesting as an opening. It was like she was just there staring up at some rocks. And I thought, okay, it was a bit of suspense, like he walks and we don't know who he is, there's a shadow.
Yeah.
But that wasn't really enough. And I thought, no, well, this is a whole, because this is a spin-off of the other story which I showed. It's a world of magic and kind of like sometimes a bit of light-hearted silliness and stuff. So I just thought, okay, well, let's go thematically. Let's kind of make a nod back to the original thing of like, we start with a character falling through the sky, and you've got no idea what's going on.
It's like a real cold open.
Yes, exactly. And it's like, you ever watch Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul?
Yeah.
It's exactly that. It's like, I love those cold opens, which for anybody who's not familiar with that term, that's where the show just starts and doesn't offer any explanation, and often gives you something very confusing and
just questions.
Yeah, and just, what's going on here? Who's that? What are they doing? And then gradually the episodes moves on, and it's the same thing. I found that quite compelling, and that was something. It's also something which I think comics need to be kind of mindful of, because unlike a TV show where once you decide to sit down and watch it, the odds are you are going to watch it if you've made that decision, and you'll sit through. So things seem to be boring. Whereas comics demands a lot more of its readers, like, because you've got to provide all the sound effects in your head, you've got to make the segues from one to the other. Sometimes you've got to interpret what the artist might be thinking as far as like what's happening in the transitions and the getters. So it's kind of important to end on like a mini cliffhanger, because one thing, I'll give an example, actually something recent which people may have seen, Paper Girls, which was on Amazon Prime. It's based off a graphic novel or a whole series of comics. In the comic, it's written so well that every page ends up with either like a mini cliffhanger or a major revelation to keep you going, and it's every single page, and that really works. And so that's something key to do. Whereas the TV series can, I mean, it's structured different for TV, so they don't need to do the same thing. So they can just dish out much more like a nicer scene transition, or just a resolution, and then bang, the next scene is there. But comics, because you need to turn the page and keep people turning the pages and keep them engaged, you need to have something. And so, for example, here, page 1, you have the view of the tortoise, which is looking up. Now, thinking, it's looked up at the woman falling from the sky. And then we think, oh no, is this tortoise going to get crushed horribly? Because you don't know what kind of story I'm telling at this point. So it could happen. And then similarly, once the scientist is stranded, we see like a black silhouette, and I've intentionally made the rock he was holding look like a weapon. And so it looks a bit sinister, it's a bit sharp. And so you're thinking like, oh, okay, where's this going now? And then it eases off. And then so we get on the final panel of page 3, she's now setting out a mission. She's like, I'm here to discover what's keeping these things up here. So it's setting up a mystery. So we now know that despite the fact we're in this strange world where there are racing tortoises and people falling out of the sky, this is something weird, these rocks. I kind of ease off on this one a bit. There's where this is where this salesman is just telling stories, and he's saying like a rock spirit, and then this wizard who was a drunk, and so you're setting up a bit more of a world and a feeling of the place, which is fun in itself. I like it when stories leave breadcrumbs for you to kind of think like, okay, well, what's that, without explaining too much. It's like it's not a massive exposition dump.
Yeah, it's quite eye-opening to see, actually, because I mean, obviously when you're doing a comic, you don't have any analytics. You don't know how many people have turned the page, where they got to, where they dropped off. But it's like it's attention grabbing, isn't it? You have to maintain attention every step of the way, which sounds draining. Like that sounds tiring as an artist, to be like, how do I, keep on churning this story along? Yeah, but it's great seeing it, and also with your comments before, the story that kind of didn't finish. Sandrine's actually mentioned in the chat, love seeing other people's mistakes. For starters, it shows that great stories are built from trial and error, and secondly, I feel less alone. So,
Sandrine, you're not alone. No, believe it. No, I mean it's There a funny thing is, actually, let's go back to this one. For example, about like pacing. If you look at this, the basic setup here is that these three characters have turned up to a town which they expected to be a bustling place, like a busy township, and everybody's dead. And so they have no idea what's going on. And you've got a person investigating here, and they're kind of mulling over things. And over here we get this body turns up. One of them's kind of alive, and you can see his eyes are red, and he's starting to. But the whole thing is really badly laid out. So yeah, to make you feel better, Sandra, this is dreadful as far as kind of composition goes, because we end this page with nothing. We've just got people talking, which isn't really going to keep people moving across the page. You've got the first two pages. It's a tactic which people use, and I don't use it anymore, where you do the repeating panel, which would replicate in TV, where everybody stood still. There's a big pause while somebody takes something in, and then you say something, which is fine in TV. But for this much of a screen, this much of the page content, just seems excessive and a bit of a waste, to be honest.
It has me looking at it, trying to find what's different from the previous frame.
You just spot the difference.
I'm not paying attention to the story. I'm just thinking, well, is there something I'm missing? That's how I look at it.
Exactly, and that's the kind of thing where like I've already lost your control on the first instance of their page, which is not good. And so this is a bit of an argument though at the moment online with people using repeated panels. I've seen it used a couple of times, okay, for comedic effect. Like if somebody really dials down on it, there's one where a comic artist says, somebody asks a comic artist about repeating panels, and do you think that's lazy? And then they have like 5 or 6 panels of the artist not changing expression, and then you say nope at the end, which is funny.
Yeah.
But typically it's, I don't know. I mean, I like to keep, and I think you should keep your viewers interested, like anyone looking at your artwork interested, as long as possible.
So Oliver's actually spotted between those two panels, the hair is different on the lead character in the middle. I think this must be where you were saying you went back and change things.
Yeah, oh my god, that's so true. I forgot that. Yeah, because the character on the far left, it's about 2 millimeters high, but he's turned his head, and so I think, that's dreadful. Good spot, Oliver. That's a good example of why not to do something. Like all of that for a head turn and a hair moving slightly.
I've just seen as well. Tony's mentioned failing to plan is planning to fail. Quoted Benjamin Franklin. Now, I could have sworn that was my mum who said that, because I heard it throughout my whole life.
That's so true, Tony. It really is. It's the thing is, I've always been a bit of an improviser, and like with my artwork, I will often, even today, like I'll kind of think, okay, I'm going to do this, but I will wing it a bit, and I enjoy the almost the chaos of it. I find it very, very hard, actually. Whenever I'm trying to show somebody my art process, I have to stop and really deconstruct it, and then go, okay, this is the stage where I would draw something. This is the stage where I would color. This is where I'd add shading. Because so often, like if you were to watch me draw, and I've seen other artists do this, so I'm not the only crazy person, but I would draw like a tiny bit over here, like draw his face, and then go, like, I could draw this person's hand, and go backwards and forwards, and it's kind of this erratic approach, and so I find it quite tricky sometimes. I think the other people are not going to follow this, but no, absolutely right. Planning on a larger scale really needs to happen, and so that was kind of one of the things I was trying to hammer home by showing this failed attempt, because there are so many things which don't work about this. I mean, there is. If we look here, we've got like, this guy's looking at something. This whole page, the suspense of this body getting up could have been so much more. And what would have worked better, if you think of, if you're reading comics, like physically in paper, reading graphic novel, reading comic, you have the page turn. It's like a surprise every time. Now you open up, you've got your 2 pages, you can see them like the entire time, and so there's nothing's going to surprise you once you've opened it initially. But had I have taken this kind of mysterious magical guy standing up, and then ended it on with a better, more well composed shot of his body kind of silhouetted looming over her from like the background about to do something, and then if you imagine this drawing like bam, like a full page, the next page as you turn it's like, oh wow, okay, like the guy's moving and it's going to shock. The suspense there would be much better. It's like I've blown the surprise there altogether. just by having him, like he's there and then say, okay, he's charging, but we know he's charging.
Yeah.
And because I think on the next page, I can't remember how much I drew, but he gets effortlessly dispatched. But
yeah, it's really interesting to hear of this, because you know, on the surface of so many industries, there's always this element of like, oh, it's just this. But then you always go below the surface and there's so many more things that make up everything in the world. And in comics and, you know, other things, you can be a fantastic illustrator, but if you can't tell a story, you're really going to limit your opportunities. And structuring is there's just so much to it. It's amazing.
It really was crazy. And I hold my hand up because I'd always wanted to do comics, but I had that kind of fear of like, am I good enough? Like, can I do it? And I just thought I've got to do it at some point. I did jump straight in with this, and like, yeah, sure, I could draw nice illustrations, but then this is what made me realize there's so much more to comics, and there was such a much a broader skill, and there's so much. It's like the iceberg. There's so much more underneath that you don't see just to see that top part. Above all,
do you find yourself going back to older comics that you read when you were younger, and now you look at it more analytically?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's kind of fun. There are certain stories. Say, The Watchmen is a good example. When I was a kid, say, I don't know, 12, 13, whenever I first read it, I was like, oh, it's okay. It's a good story, but it's like the artwork wasn't as flashy to me because it's stuck with like a very traditional 9-panel grid, and it was like page after page after page. And I think, yeah, it's okay. I don't know why everyone went so crazy about it. Because I like your characters which are jumping at the screen and doing this and like flying off webs and all that kind of stuff. And you come back to them now, and it's a masterpiece. It's like suddenly you look through and you see like this is why everybody was going on about it, because the structure's so good. I mean, there's an issue where, because it's to do with Dr. Manhattan, the big naked blue guy who kind of exists outside of time. You literally when you get to the halfway point, the story then compositionally mirrors itself backwards. The story still carries on, and so you don't notice it like unless you're looking for it like artistically. And so everything, but you see like everything's mirrored and it all carries on. And Dave Gibbons, the artist, was meticulous. And I've actually got his art book. The Watchmen, the book itself, say it's like this thick. The art book is like that thick.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of it isn't to do with multiple concept art. There is some stuff there of like character sketches and designs and whatnot, but so much of it is just planning.
Yeah,
and it's insane. And he did things. For example, again with Dr. Manhattan, there's one page where he's starting to phase through something like a door or a wall or something or other. Then when you turn the page, in the exact same corresponding place in the artwork, he materializes the other side of this thing after a number of other panels where people are still talking. And it's literally exactly where it would be.
So it's like a match cut in filmmaking.
Yeah, it's really, really clever. And yeah, when you plan these things, there was a story called Rising Stars, which is an old one by J. Michael Straczynski, who's a writer who made things like Babylon 5 and stuff back in the day. There was a character who could see ghosts, but you didn't know this until the end. But literally, it just ended on this page where this character was just sitting, looking depressed on an armchair by himself with quite a lot of black space. And so you think, okay, he's just lonely and sad. And then you turn the next page, and you suddenly see it's all white with these characters all around him who are all ghosts with dialogue. and then you realize you can hold it up to the light, and then you can see literally the page, like the artwork comes together as you lift it up towards the light. It's really clever, which again, planning.
Yeah. So how do you go about planning from a start? Like, what's your initial point? Do you have like set stages that you go through, or is it always evolving?
It's a bit of both. It's that sounds annoyingly vague. No, I suppose what I learned from this story forming in particular was, let's move that out of the way because we don't see my old stuff anymore. So some newer stuff. I will have an idea of what the story needs to say, like where I want to go with it. And so I will have a start point and an end point. And this is where my improvisational side kicks in, is that I will then I will have my major beats, like this needs to happen, this character needs to do this. So you've got like your vague signposts. And then I will open up.
Do you have any sort of like idea on, say, page number? Like, is it specific to that element of like, say?
No. It's some people will do, and they're probably smarter, to be honest. They're very smarter. No, I tend to have a vague, like various waypoints that I'm going to hit, and then I will just type and have the characters talk to each other, and I would just think like, okay, like this character is going to react, so I won't have specific things in mind for them to say. I just think, okay, if I was in this situation, how would I react? And so this character does this, and I think like, oh well, no, well this character's, I don't know, say like a scientist, so they're more rational, so they're probably not going to do like what I would do necessarily. And you kind of let them talk and find their voice. And it can go through a few iterations where you think like, no, that's too much me talking, or this feels like I'm just trying to drop some plot point or exposition. And so I kind of have it chat through, and then show it to my wife, who then will read it and be brutal and tell me it's words I don't want to say on a live stream.
Yeah.
and then I
good to have people close to you who can do that.
Yes, yeah, it's she loves doing that. She'll walk into my office. I could be doing something all day long and wrestling with it and trying really hard, and then she'll just walk in, look over, and go, no, and then possibly make a rude word about it, and then walk, and I'm like, but yeah, okay, that's right, let's start again.
Yeah,
because I mean, you know what it's like. Sometimes you start something and then you just got to call it a day with and start again.
Yeah, it's hard to throw away your babies. It's
yes. Yeah, it's the kill your darlings advice. It's like, oh, I don't want to get rid of this, I drew loads of it, but it's like sometimes it needs to go.
Yeah. Do you find that this is actually kind of tied in with a question Sandrine's asked? Do you find yourself getting attached to certain characters as you're creating them? Because Sandrine has mentioned of when you root for a particular character and then discover they're not likable anymore, and then you see that the layout's changed. So I'm wondering if, from an artist perspective, do you get attached to a character, then you decide, you know what, I don't like them, and then you change your style to reflect that?
Kind of. It's more the other way, actually.
Okay.
It's more. Good question, by the way, Sandrine. Well done. And that's it tends to be, say you've got your story and you go, okay, cool, this needs to happen, this character's going to do this character's going to die at this point, because then other stuff will happen. But say you start to write them a bit, and then you start to get in the characters' heads. And I found this when I used to do acting as well. It's like you approach every character, no matter how small they are, they're the hero of their own story, as we all are. We're all our own most important person in real life, where we see things from our perspective. Sometimes people will wrong us and like, why did they do that to us? It's like, for their perspective, they were not doing anything wrong. And so I get into the heads of the characters, not in like a crazy method acting way or anything, but just in a kind of like, no, this character, nobody is a bad guy for the sake of being a bad guy, for example. Like they all have the motivation. And typically, especially when you're writing and creating the characters yourself, you think up of something, you start to go a little bit more than you're never going to tell people what the backstory is. Be like, this character's grumpy. Okay, why are they grumpy? And then suddenly you've given them this whole tragic thing which happened when they were a kid or something, and there's like, and then, oh my god, the poor thing. And suddenly you've got a character who's supposed to be a jerk, who you're not supposed to like. Like, yeah, but they're okay, really. Like, if you knew what they went through. And or sometimes you'll have a character who's more of a throwaway character initially, and this must be what it's like for people who are writing a TV show, and the actors suddenly just bring something new to it, where you're like, oh, this character's more important than I realized they were, and they're more fun, and then suddenly you're like, but I don't want to kill them. This is terrible. No, I need to change things now. It's like, oh, is there any way I can rewrite this? And then it becomes more of a thing of how much are you writing for the story or writing for yourself? And then then it's that horrible thing of when you do start to care for the characters, understand them, then you don't want to make them suffer or do anything bad. But at the same time, normally the best stories are the ones where our characters are really suffering and bad things are happening to them, so you can see them overcome them and like feel they've earned something. But yeah, that's kind of that can be like a quite grueling, really, actually, mentally, now you think about it. I didn't realize I was traumatized, but now I realize I am.
Yeah, you kind of, you're building up all these friends and characters that that you created. It's it's all at your disposal, yet at the same time it's kind of keeping you company. It's quite interesting as a perspective.
I don't know how many people I can admit this to, otherwise I'm going to start sounding strange.
Well, it reminds me, actually, you mentioned Breaking Bad at the start. I think Jesse's character was supposed to die in the first season.
Yes, he was, yeah.
And then, they kept him on because he obviously just brought this dynamic that, worked so well. And it became main character. Like, you look, it happens.
And at the end, it became a lot about, is Jesse going to be okay? Whereas Walt went down a very bad path.
Yeah.
And I mean, do you know what? Do you find I'm going off track slightly, but that was an interesting thing. That really changed when I rewatched it the second time. And you realize your sympathies have been completely altered by what you know. That then became like I suddenly didn't like the character, whereas you were rooting for him the first time round, up to a point where suddenly you were like, is this the bad guy? It's like, should I be agreeing with this guy? And then you realize like how much you could potentially do your own kind of horrible rationalization of things because it makes sense to you because you were going along with that character.
Yeah, it makes me think actually with comics, when you mentioned earlier that people are adding their sound effects themselves and the voices and things. And when it comes to making movies of comics, it's quite common to have a very separated audience between they either love it or they hate it. How much of that do you think is down to because they've built their own story and that the character just isn't the character that they heard in their head?
Oh, probably quite a lot. I would say that kind of thing. It's I could argue for both points of this equation, actually. There's certainly if you see a character for a certain time. Let's go for random one. Let's say like Hellboy. I saw the film first, like the old Del Toro films, and I enjoyed them. And then I read the comics and I was like, wow, he's a different character in this. Like, this is a different thing. And Mignola said that as well, Mike Mignola, the guy who created Hellboy. I was like, his thing still exists. And he said it's a different thing. And sure enough, the latest version of Hellboy as well, that was a different spin on the character again. And I wasn't a fan of that because actually, do you know what? I've just proved your point. because in that version he was more petulant and young, whereas in the comics, which I'd grown to love, he was more like a kind of beaten down blue collar worker who was just tired, and that became my Hellboy in my head, and so that was when I gravitated to. So yeah, I'm going to say a lot of it's that.
Yeah, it kind of then just puts you in a perspective of you can't win, so.
Yes.
No matter
Yeah.
how you plan it, you
Yeah.
can't win on this. Yeah.
Yeah. I think what can work well is for example, the Umbrella Academy. That is more loosely inspired by the comics rather
Hmm.
than like slavishly follows them. It kind of follows the plot points a bit, but
Yeah.
it adds entire plot lines and characters and does its own thing. But it has a similar spirit to it, and so for me that kind of works. It's like I don't necessarily the comics exist, and so I've got the comics for what they want with like the
Hmm.
crazy stuff, much like it in my illustrations there. You've got like your sound effects of the character going and it's going right across the page, and then there's like a massive whoomp when she lands, which you probably wouldn't have in a live action one unless you were already playing up the comedic elements of it.
Mm.
But it's like that these things exist in their own mediums, and so I don't know. I think there's something enjoyable. I just remembered my point, which is yeah, like with the Umbrella Academy, like they took the spirit of it, which was that kind of slight off the wall craziness where like stuff's happening, but it's also kind of silly and kind of fun,
Yeah.
and they just do that and they don't follow it plot by plot, and so you've got then two different things. So your brain doesn't have to try to marry them together and say I like this one or I like this one or these are supposed to be the same thing. Like they can exist as separate pieces of art, and that's fine.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's a interesting one. I think it would be interesting actually of how your perspective may shift and develop as your work, goes on to wider audiences, and if any of these get made into a film, for example,
Yes.
or a live action thing, that's going to be a whole different experience. That will be amazing to see.
It would be weird. I mean, I'm quite happy to experience it to find out with all of the money that would come with it. But yeah, it would be a thing of when you see. I can't imagine what it's like to have an actor embody the character, because it could go either way. You could either have like, wow, they are bringing so much, and this is just like they've come to life, or you're like, no, this is completely wrong. This is not how my character would be.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. So when you're starting, do you actually do you decide on who all of the characters are when you begin, or do you start adding in characters where you think like something's missing, or?
Yeah, sometimes I will add characters if something is missing. It's you often get a quick, like a small supporting character becomes larger, and sometimes, for example, actually this salesman guy, he was a culmination of a joke where I'd had in this main story. The idea was I can show you the artwork actually. I've still got it. When she makes this big explosion, it created, and this isn't a spoiler for anything else because I've changed how things work now, but it created a kind of like a magic, like aura, which then made all the rocks float around afterwards after they left. And I came up with this idea that it was just this salesman who was just entrepreneurial and had like just set up a stall and was trying to sell stuff. And that idea kind of made me laugh because it was kind of stupid. And that was just like, that was a comedy character. And then I suddenly like came up with the extra joke, because I love stupid jokes like this, where what if he has loads of relatives with a really shallow gene pool who all look kind of the same? And so like this guy's name's Ed, one of them's Ted, and then you just keep changing variations of the name. And so they look almost identical. And so people confuse who they are, and they act exactly the same way. And then and so then he became the perfect person to fill in this story when you've got your scientist who's trying to discover something. And so he's like the co-star now of the thing, whereas like originally he was just a one-off joke of like some salesperson.
Yeah, that also ties in another question here of do you often have people reviewing your work as you're working on it? And I guess that also expands to reviewing, say, the story as well as the actual artwork.
A bit. a bit. It depends on how much I trust them. There's a certain amount where I don't much like I don't know. You may have this with photography projects and things like you'll know what your end goal is, and so you know how it needs to be. And if you just showed somebody like your first couple of photographs or something, they were like, yeah, I like it, but it's like maybe you should try one with people in, or like maybe try from this angle, like low down or something. And then you're like, no, that's not the point of what you're going for. So I tend to like, at least for the initial first pass, I will write everything out completely myself and think, okay, this is something which I would enjoy. And then I will pass it to, there's only a few people who I would trust because I think like, okay, they're not going to try to change it to how they would like, which is a lot of times what people will do. But I'm sure like many producers and editors and whatnot will get involved and try to I like this. I like science fiction though. I want this to be in here. It's like, it's not science fiction. So
I guess you need people who are calibrated to your story and your way of thinking. And so that they know that if they ask a particular question of, have you thought about this? It's because they know that you already have, but maybe from a slightly different angle. Just asking anyone random, you'll get random results.
Yes. Well, it's kind of funny with, like, say with this, 'cause this is completely my own. You can be a bit more megalomaniacal with it. It's very much like, no, this is mine, this is kind of how we want it to be. Whereas the other thing, like when you're working with a team of people in the comics, like the writer and you, then it's very much more back and forth. Because I might turn and say, oh well, I think we're off as far as the balance of characters here. Like we can maybe do this. This seems all entirely men, and then the writer can come back like, no, well this is kind of like how I plan stuff. That's how I want it to be. And then you've got to say, okay, well that's fine. That's your call in this case. And it depends how much of a back and forth. So that you can certainly. I always try to push for things a bit, but I try to be very reasonable and try to remember like it's when you're working with somebody, you do need to respect that, and they've also got their ideas. And if you have a good team, which I've been very lucky this last year or so, I've worked with only people who are very nice. and so that's been great. And so oftentimes I'll know kind of where and when I can suggest something. It's like, oh, I think this would work, and I go, yeah, that's brilliant, that's great. But I'm not then trying to say, like, I've always liked characters that do this, and so I think you should add a character that does this. Whereas in my own stuff, I can do whatever on earth I want. It's like this, like the racing tortoise appears because I find that funny. it's one of those things like where it's like somebody else makes like, oh, I'm not sure about that. It doesn't really add anything to it. It's like, yeah, but it's mine.
Yeah, no, it's I think that's a great position to be in. If you can work on your things and, you know, manifest those and create them, then that's kind of the happiest place to be, right? It's your project and you get to hold the reins on it.
Oh yeah, I think it's so important, whatever kind of creative field you're in, do the things that you love. Like if you do something and you enjoy it and you're not worried about demographics or likes or anything else, like how much like how many likes or retweets you're going to get or anything, and not trying to please the algorithm. If you're just making the stuff that you like, there'll be someone out there will like it, because you can always see that creative people have more fun when they're doing something they like, and then it reads through the artwork, be it photography, acting, drawing, like take your pick. It's like you can always tell when somebody's in love with what they're doing.
Yeah, you can't spread passion if you're not passionate yourself.
No, you can do a serviceable job. You can make it look nice as much as you can, but like you need the love there.
Yeah,
it's always the way.
Yeah, very interesting discussions. People in the chat as well appreciating it. I think it's it's been great to chat through. We are just coming up to the top of the hour. So what have we got in store tomorrow with Maddie?
Tomorrow, very, very different. It's going to be Maddie last time asked about drawing something, and then I turned out not to be drawing. I was doing some colouring stuff. So to make up for that, I'm doing actually drawing stuff, and I'm going to talk about. This is not going to sound sexy at first. I'm going to talk about the logic of clothing folds, which
All right.
it was something that I really struggled with, and lots of times people explain this in a really dry, straightforward fashion. And I saw something a while ago which kind of unlocked it in my brain, and I've never seen anyone else like ever kind of approach it in this way. So I'm going to share that and say, okay, this is how you think about the stuff behind, and it's really simple. And even if you can't draw, we can all do this tomorrow because we just need some photos and we can just work with those.
Yeah.
And so
Tim's just said, the logic of clothing folds, or as I like to call it, don't bother, just throw them in the basket. So we've got ironing tomorrow then. That's
yeah, lots of ironing. Bring your own.
Yeah. Hey, if we're here for an hour, then yeah, you can do your ironing whilst you're watching.
To a mass ironing stream.
Yeah, that would actually be quite an efficient use of time. I'd applaud that. Anyway, thanks for joining us today, David. Thanks for all the chats. As someone who's never really been involved in making anything comic related, this is just immensely inspiring for me. So thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone in the chat, and we will see you tomorrow and Wednesday with more comic illustration.
Yeah. See you soon.
See you.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.